Hello, everyone, and welcome to our global class on smart cities today. My name is Laisa, and I am part of the International Relations Department at Unis Group, and I will be moderating this class today. I want to start by thanking our two guest speakers, Professor Fernando and Professor Rodrigo. Dr. Fernando Terrosi Science, PhD in Computer Science, is an associate professor at Catholic University of Murcia in Spain. He has published more than 30 articles in international journals and congresses. His research includes smart mobility, human-generated data analysis, and mobile sensing. His lecture will be Analysis of Human Mobility as a Key Enabler for Smart City Services. Dr. Rodrigo Froghetti, PhD in Information System and Knowledge Management, is a master professor in Management and Regional Development at UNIS in Brazil. He is also a bachelor professor in Information System, technologist in System Analysis and Development, and technologist in Digital Games Development, also at UNIS. His lecture will be Smart Cities, Opportunities and Challenges. So if you have any questions, you can comment here on chat that we will take the questions to the professors after the end of each presentation. So let's get started. Professor Fernando, the screen is all yours.
So thank you very much for this nice introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today. And well, I'm going to start my presentation and my talk. I don't know if you can see my screen. I guess so. My presentation is entitled Analysis of Human Mobility as a Key Enabler for Smart City Services. This talk is actually comprises two different parts, okay? In the first one, we are going to provide an overview about human mobility and why understanding and modeling human mobility is quite important nowadays. And also we are going to provide an overview about the data that we need in order to perform that analysis and that modeling. In the second part of my talk, we are going to explain how that movement, that data, can be used to develop certain services and applications in the context of a smart city. So, regarding the first part of my talk, when we think about human mobility, maybe the first question that we can think about is, well, why human mobility is so important? Or why understanding and modeling and work and human mobility data is so important? Well, if we think about human mobility, we can see that our entire history and evolution and species is totally linked with our movement. If we think about the Homo sapiens and the large displacements and trips that they performed to cover the entire world until the moon landing that occurred in the last century, we can see that our history and evolution is totally related to our movement. Like, for example, also the discovery of the New World. And actually, the movement or understanding the movement of the human mobility is not important from an historical point of view, from a biological point of view, because nowadays humans still move, maybe for different reasons than our ancestors. In the past, people tend to move because of the place where they live. There was, for example, a scarcity of animals or vegetables, and human beings needed to move from another place in order to find food. Maybe those primary reasons, if we think about a little bit, maybe those primary reasons that motivated people to move from one place to another still remain because of the climate change. But it is true that now we live also in a more complex society, and people also move because of other reasons, more complex reasons, but mainly because of economic reasons, I will say. So we are not an stationary animal. We actually an in motion creature, and we are totally linked with our movement. And actually, if we think in our routines, in our daily lives, we can see that most of us move move across 2 or 3 places. So people is bound to move on a daily basis. So the impact that mobility has in our lives covers different aspects. Economic aspects, because for instance, between the 15 and the 25% of the budget of a house is related to transportation activities. And for instance, transportation is the second source of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. So human mobility has a great impact, not only from economic from the point of view of an from an economic point of view, but also has a great impact in the environment. So for that reason, it's quite important to come up with accurate descriptions of human mobility that explain how people move in different scenarios to actually understand the impact that mobility has in aspects like community, economics, or the environment. And also, if we are able to understand human mobility and the motivation that makes people move, we will able to answer some questions that are paramount for many different actors. For instance, we will able to answer the question of what determines the decision to start a trip, or which factors determine the choice of a destination, why people tend to go to a destination instead of another destination, or to what extent is human movement predictable. If we answering these questions and more questions that are formulated in the human mobility domain, it's very important for many different actors. And I will say more. During the last year, due to the COVID pandemic, we have seen that being able to understand and to model how people move is a very important tool in order to fight this type of, or to come up or to fight this type of pandemic scenarios, because human movement and human interactions are a paramount, are a very important factor in the spreading of a virus. So for that reason, that explains that during the last year, in the research community, the analysis of human mobility and the extraction of patterns that define human mobility at different scales, spatial scales, temporal scales, and scenarios has become a very active topic within the research community. As an example, here we can see the number of publications in a public repository related to human mobility or mobility patterns during the last year. And we can see that there is a clear increment in the number of publications related to that topic. So, okay, we know that understanding human mobility and being able to model and to define how people move at different scales and different scenarios is quite important. So the next question that we can ask ourselves is, okay, and how we capture human mobility, how we measure human mobility. Well, in that sense, it is true that for the last 60 years, researchers have used a varied palette of data sources that has allowed to more or less assess and evaluate the mobility, or has been to measure the human mobility in different scenarios. Here we are going to briefly describe the most important ones based on a chronological order. So, the first source of data that researchers used in order to study human mobility was census data. Because census data is collected by local and national governments by means of periodical surveys, by means of forms that like the blue one that I am showing here in this slide. And this type of surveys usually cover questions about demographics and other aspects, but they also include questions related to the location of the workplace, the place of the current and the previous residents, and things like that. So with the answers to those mobility-related questions, researchers were able to more or less extract the human behavior in terms of movement in different countries. In that sense, census data, I have to say that this is not a very modern data source. Actually, the first national census in the USA was released in the 1790s. Another second source of data that researchers has used to try to understand human mobility was another type of survey that was local travel surveys. This is also forms or surveys that are spread among the population and try to collect more detailed data about mobility aspects of a population, like, for instance, the purpose of a trip or the mode of transport used to go from one place to another. And we can see here an example of one of these type of local travel surveys. But what is the problem of this type of surveys? The problem is that of this type of surveys is that they usually are focused on a particular region, a particular city or particular neighborhood. It is true that they provide a very accurate information about the mobility of a population, but it is restricted to a particular spatial area. On the contrary, the census data that we have seen before usually cover a larger spatial scale. So we have a trade-off. The local travel service provides some kind of trade-off between accuracy and scale. And also with the answers to this service, researchers are able to extract more or less detail the human flows that occurs within a region. A third type of data moves from this type of survey-based data, and it's a very original one, but it actually is a very valuable data source for human mobility, which are dollar bills, because, at least for the USA, because the movement of a banknote between geographical regions occurs when it is carried by the individual. So there is a platform, called Where's George, that allows citizens around the world to register a particular note with his code, with his identifier, and indicate the location where that bill is located. So with that information, it is possible to extract more or less the movement of people based on those bills. For instance, here we have an example of different movement of different bills from different locations in the USA, and these lines indicate the movement of that bills. For instance, a bill that has moved from Seattle here to near New York and things like that. Last week, when I was preparing this slide, I extracted that information, the total bills of entries in that platform, the total dollar value, and we can see that there's a large number of bills that have been introduced in that platform, and that provides a very curious and a very funny, I will say, data source to extract human mobility in this case of the USA, because we are talking about dollar bills. But if we think about the three first data sets that we have seen, census data, travel surveys, and dollar bills, they provide mobility information in a crowd-based view. They provide how crowd of people or how the entire population move across different regions. But the actually the game-changing data from human mobility, the actually data source that has allowed to explore human mobility and to analyze human mobility to a great level of detail was the call detail records, or CDRs. Those records are basically the records that are stored by the phone carriers' cell towers, routing the communication for call and messages. And this allows to pinpointing the approximate location of the user. So here we can see an example of different towers depicted as colored dots, and the lines indicate the different movement that users perform in a city with the connection with the towers that they connect at each moment. The key benefit of these call detail records is that, unlike the other three, the first three sources, this data source allows to extract individual mobility patterns. So now we are able to extract not the movement of the entire population, but the movement of a particular individuals. So now we have a fine-grained mobility data that is more detailed than the other first three data sources. Another source of mobility data, maybe most of you have think about that in terms of human mobility, was GPS data. GPS data is more or less provides also a very precise information about location covered when provided by GPS satellites, and provide a great level of accuracy. And the good point is that for this type of data is that GPS trackers and receivers are installed in everyday objects that we use every day: bracelets, smartphones, cars, and this allows to collect a large amount of very detailed movement data. For instance, here we have the GPS trajectories extracted from different GPS trackers and receivers in the city of Florence in Italy, and we can see that these traces, these trajectories, almost represent the whole urban topology of the city. We have almost every road covered by at least one trajectory. And finally, the last source of data that researchers have been using during the last days is social media data extracted for different online social networks like Twitter or Foursquare. Foursquare was maybe it's not as popular as it was a few years ago. The thing is that thanks to the GPS, this data, this social media is related to the GPS, now the posts that we publish in different online social network platforms like Twitter or Instagram are geotagged with the GPS coordinates of our device. So now we are also able to extract the movement that we perform in a city based on the different posts or the different tweets or the different photos that we post in a social network. Social media data has also an advantage with respect to GPS data. GPS data just provides the road trajectories or the road movement of people. Social media data also provides certain contextual information because apart from the GPS coordinates of our mobile phone, we have also available the text that we post in a tweet or the photo that we upload in the Instagram. So this the social media data also provides us some kind of contextual data data associated to the geographical locations. So we have reviewed the different data sources that we have in order to extract human mobility. It's one at different spatial scales, but we have seen that, okay, we have a large palette of a large variety of data sources to study human mobility. So we know that human mobility is important. We have different types of data to analyze human mobility. So the next question is, okay, and who do we model human mobility? How we can define the human mobility of a region? Well, we are going to briefly describe 3 different models that have been proposed in the literature to define the human, to model or to define the human mobility of a region. The first one is a very popular one, a very simple one that makes some general assumptions in a scenario, but that has been proved to work more or less, that defines in a more or less accurate manner the mobility or the human displacements that occurs within a city. And the gravity law said that the flow of goods, or I will say people, between 2 cities is proportional to the product of their population. And this makes sense. I mean, the more population 2 cities have, the highest the number of trips between these 2 cities. This makes sense. And it also indicates that this flow, the number of trips that occurs between 2 cities, is inversely proportional to the distance between the centers. That makes sense as well. So the farthest 2 cities are, the less trips between those cities will occur. And this is defined by a very, very, very simple. I promise this is the only mathematical formula I include in the slides. Okay, but this is a very, very basic formula. So the gravity law is defined by a very, very basic formula, which is the number of trips between 2 cities, E, Y, and G, is defined by the product of their populations divided by the distance between those populations. This is a very basic model, but works quite well in many, many scenarios and allows to more or less define or estimate the number of trips that will occur between 2 centers or 2, I will say, urban regions. A second model that has been proposed in the literature, and is a very famous one, is the law of intervening opportunities. And it just defines that the distance that a person tends to move to a destination is directly proportional to the number of opportunities in that destination. Opportunities, we can say the number of jobs, or the quality of life, and things like that, the urban infrastructure, all the types of opportunities of that city. And the distance that that person will travel to the destination is inversely proportional to the intervening opportunities. And what is that? It's just the opportunities that are, or the other destinations that are closer to the final one that offer other opportunities. So what this model says that I will travel further if the opportunities or the features of the destination are more attractive than other destinations that are closer. Okay. These 2 models that I defined before just model human mobility in a crowd-based manner. They define human mobility in a crowd-based manner. There is another model, the third one, just try to understand human mobility, but in an individual manner. To do that, researchers who define this model, this is called returners versus explorers, was defined by a set of researchers based on GPS and call detail records trajectories. Here we can see, based on 2 Italian cities, the one are the trajectories. It was a very famous image from the study. The trajectories from 2 different cities, blue one, from 2 different Italian cities, the red one and the blue one, and this resembles to 2 neurons in the brain. It seems to 2 neurons in the brain. So what these researchers find was that people tend to, the mobility of a person, the mobility profiles of a person people tend to have 2 different types of human mobility profiles. A profile is the returners, that are people who usually move between a few locations, and explorers, that are people that have a tendency to wander between a larger number of different locations. And researchers find that individuals persistently belong to returners or explorers. So when we move, are or returners or explorers. but we do not change our profile. If we are returners, we are always returners. When we are explorers, we are always explorers. So these are three examples of how human mobility can be modeled and can be modeled in different scenarios. So at this point, we move on to the second point of our talk, which is how this data and how these models can be used to provide smart city services. Well, in that sense, one of the most important applications that we can develop for human mobility is a human mobility prediction to be able to anticipate or to be able to forecast the destinations of people. If we're able to anticipate which are going to be the movement of a crowd of people or individuals in the future. Why? Because if we are able to anticipate and to predict what is going to be the destination of a person or a crowd of people, we will be able to provide with information to the citizens in advance. If we know that a person is going to move to the city center in 2 hours time, we will be able to provide to that citizen about restaurants in the city center, about exhibitions in that city center, because we know that that person is going to move to the city center of the city. But also predicting the mobility behavior of a population is also instrumental for different authorities and operators to provide better services. For instance, if we are able to anticipate the human movement or the movement of a crowd, authorities will be able, for instance, to adjust the transport fees at a certain time. If we know that a lot of people are going to leave the town in 2 hours time, maybe the train operators can adjust the train tickets for that time. And also, due to the pandemic scenario that we have lived for the last year, it will also very useful, that prediction, in order to define, for instance, proactive lockdown policies. If I know that in a particular region of a city, in 3, 4, or 5 hours ahead, people is going to leave that region in an abnormal manner, then authorities will be able to close that region in advance, to avoid a certain abnormal or irregular behavior of movement in a lockdown scenario. In that sense, in the literature, it's possible to find a lot of predictors and human mobility predictors based on many different machine learning methods. And in that sense, the artificial intelligence field plays a key role in order to develop those predictors. But within our research group, we observe that most of the predictors that we find in the literature rely on a map representation of the target urban environment in order to perform the predictions, in order to anticipate the movements. The problem that we saw is that in most cities, we do not have a very high defined map of the city. Maybe in very big cities we have that kind of maps, but in other ones we don't have. We cannot rely on high definition maps. So what we do is we extract the movement of different citizens within a city based on the GPS trajectories of those citizens. And what we do is just to identify the points of those trajectories where people tend to change the direction of the trajectory of their movement, turn left or turn right. Why we do that? Because then we use those points that are completely independent of the map representation of the city. We just identify in this particular location, people tend to turn left or turn right. Why we do that? Because then, based on the movement of a person and in the points of the city where he turns left or turns right or just go straight on, we are able to predict its final destination. And the good point is that we do not rely on any map representation. As we can see at the end, our predictor, we say this layer, does not rely on the urban topology of the city. Here we can this plot, this figure. I have included that in order to see one of the problems of the GPS trajectories is that in certain aspects they are very noisy. Here we can see that the movement of a person is that the red line is his trajectory, follows a quite erratic movement in a certain part of the city that not seems to be a very clear movement. And this is like I've included this figure in order to see that GPS data sometimes also, although it provides a very accurate mobility information, also can be noisy in certain occasions. We just tested our solution in Beijing, in China, by using open data set of GPS trajectories. And just to conclude, I will say that we were able to at the end make a prediction for more than 60% of the trajectories, with an error between the predicted destination and the true destination of each user that was below 500 meters at the end of the study. I'm running out of time, I know, so I will skip the other services that me and my team in the research group developed for the last years. It's a pity, but I think I'm going to stick to the schedule. So I just will move on to the final slide that I find very interesting. Is just if someone is interested in the human mobility domain and wants to start a research in the human mobility field, what are the resources that he will need to start with? Well, I will recommend 3 books, or 2 books and a paper. One is a very well-known machine learning book with hands-on. This one, hands-on machine learning with scikit-learn curves and TensorFlow. This is a very good one. Then the second book is completely devoted to urban computing and provide different services and machine learning methods related to human mobility. And this paper provides a great overview about human mobility analysis and data in a great overview about this field. In terms of software, if one wants to start to deploy or start to code certain or play with the human mobility data, for sure Python is the programming language that I will strongly recommend, although R is also important. But I have always worked with Python. I will recommend these 3 libraries based on Python: Moving Pandas, Scikit Mobility, and Dask. These are 3 very, very good software libraries to work with human mobility. Dask is not related to human mobility, it's to handle and to process large amount of 2 podcasts related to the intelligent artificial field and actually the human mobility field. These 2 podcasts, Practical EA, IA, and Map Escaping podcast. And finally, this is my contacts related to my Twitter account, my email account, and the URL of my research group. So thank you very much. I'm sorry that I was not able to finish all my slides, but in any case, if you have any question, I can ask any of them or clarify if you have I'm interested in any type of service in the questions time. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much, and sorry for running out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Fernando. It was very interesting. I really like it. And no problem about the time. It's fine, no problem. Since we don't have any questions, I think we can go to Professor Rodrigo now.
Yeah, let's go. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon to our colleagues from Brazil, Latin America, and good evening to our colleagues from Europe, Asia. It's a pleasure for me to be here with all of you today. I really hope that this brief discussion you are going to have can arouse your interest in the theme and foster future research involving smart cities. Well, the main theme of this meeting is smart cities, opportunities, and challenges. I'm a Professor Rodrigo Franklin Frogeri, and I'll be with you for the next half hour. Let's go. Here I have organized the core topics of the presentation, which are initially we'll discuss the concept of smart cities. For about 10 minutes, I intend to present to you what the scientific literature has discussed about the concept of smart cities. I think it's of fundamental importance to understand what a smart city is before we can have more in-depth discussion about what technology to use or what strategy to employ to make smart city projects feasible. The second topic is about smart cities around the world. In this topic, I'll present to you the ways in which the literature has classified a city as a smart city. And we will also discuss briefly some indicators for smart cities. The third topic is about international standards for evaluate smart cities. I'll present the main indexes used today to classify a smart city and which are these cities according to these indexes. And the fourth topic is about thoughts, reflections, challenges, and opportunities that involve the theme smart cities. Let's go. Um, First of all, we need to discuss what the motivations are for thinking about smart cities. We have to consider that urban centers are characterized by complex systems that interconnect people, organizations, means of transportation, natural resources, security, public services, and these systems must coexist in harmony in the same environment. Cities are complex environments, and the cities are still experiencing different phenomena that make them even more difficult to manage. We can see some phenomena such as rural exodus, high rates of population concentration in small territorial areas, increase in vehicle fleets disproportionate to the growth of public roads, social inequality, and other urban problems have created challenges for governments that must seek innovative and sustainable solutions that provide better services to the citizens. So we believe that all these urban phenomena can be minimized if we make our cities smarter. But then I ask you, what is a smart city? So I try to figure out on the next slides. Before we look in the specialized literature for what a smart city is, I would like to present you two very simple sentences. The first sentence says, a great city is that which has the greatest man and woman. And the second sentence says, the city is what it is because our citizens are what they are. Now, I ask you, what do these two sentences have in common? I will answer that myself. The first sentence highlights that a city is made up of men and women, referencing people in general. The second sentence highlights citizens as essential elements to a city. So, uh, both sentences highlight the importance of people to a city. Once there's no city without people. I would like you keep these two sentences because they will be useful in further discussions. Let's move on. Um, well, now I think we are ready to discuss the concept of smart cities based on specialized literature. Our first study say the theme smart cities has been subject of discussions by the scientific community for some time, but it's still an abstract image and lack conceptual precision. According to these studies, the concept of smart cities is still confusing and broad. Let's look at what other authors say. Many authors have sought to define the domains that comprise a smart city or even propose redefine the term to a broader approach, such as smart and sustainable cities, considering that a smart city is also sustainable. Okay, great. We have here a new word when we think about the concept of smart cities, the word sustainability. And let's see a third viewpoint. A smart system must be endowed with infrastructure, human capital, and information with a digital dimension capable of generating knowledge. Well, if we consider the three approaches presented, we have a new dimension called sustainability and another one called knowledge generation. So I would like to discuss the first one a bit more. Here, I bring you a study that observed smart cities as sustainable cities as well. The authors of this study analyzed the concept of smart cities from the point of view of sustainable smart cities, defining 10 key sectors. The first one is the environment, second one, urbanization, third one, water and waste management, fourth, transportation, energy, economy, education, culture, science, health and safety, governance and citizen engagement, and finally, information communication technologies. Uh, Furthermore, the authors observed three impact categories, such as environmental, economic, and social sustainability. The authors aimed to guide decision making and evaluate the development of actions related to design of a smart, sustainable city. So, uh, what can we learn from this approach? Uh, I believe that this view of sustainable smart cities is more realistic than just smart cities. But why? Because it doesn't make sense for a city to be conceptualized as smart but not be sustainable. In the same way, it doesn't make sense for a city to have main technological elements if these researches don't improve the quality of life of these citizens. So, a smart and sustainable city must provide both quality of life and be guided by sustainable practice. However, there's a lot of confusion in academia when associating smart cities only with the application of technological researches. So I'd like to discuss this further. In this slide, I bring you some discussions involving smart cities and information communication technology. Né? That's called ICTs. The authors looked at the relationship of the indicators of a smart city, economy, people, governance, mobility, environment, and quality of life, and their respective digital indicators, a total of 74 indicators. Well, the author's goal was quite clear to evaluate the influence that ICTs have in a smart city. So I asked my students in information technology courses, do ICTs influence the construction or the viability of smart city projects? What do you think they would answer me? I believe that the vast majority would answer me, oh yes, for sure, absolutely. There's no smart city without ICTs. So I would like to share with you the results of this paper. Gifger, the main author of this paper, observed that the digital indicators did not dominate any of the domains that characterize a smart city, but they are important for all of them. Other authors consider that the availability and or quality of an ICT infrastructure does not represent intelligence or define a city as being smart. Well, this is an important observation for us. I'd like you to take note it and let's move on. In this paper, the authors evaluated the effect of ICT use and capability of knowledge-based cities. I believe this is an interesting approach and in line with previous studies I have presented because it looks at cities beyond the concept of smart cities. In this study, we observe a concept that are considered as an evolution of smart cities, the knowledge cities. I consider table 1 of the study very important for us to understand the different approaches to smart cities in the literature. We can observe in table 1 that there is a subdivision between ICT use and ICT capabilities. I understand this is an evolutionary process in which an early stage cities make a more intense use of ICTs, and then these ICTs start to be observed as capabilities. ICTs as capabilities allow the smart city vision to be more focused on citizens and their quality of life, as opposed to the application of ICTs as using. I think ICTs as using has an approach much more associated with data connections, smart sensors, and hardware elements in general. Uh, Finally, I present to you a concept of a smart city that I use in a paper. Cities are smart when they appropriate their own information knowledge to improve quality of life, social inclusion, environmental sustainability, economic competitiveness, and the use of governance principles in the political decision-making process without the need to possess large technological apparatus. Well, I think it's not a final concept of a smart city, but a concept to think about. So, to finish our discussions about the concept of a smart city and to understand what a smart city involves, I present to you the central components of a smart city according to this study from Gil Garcia. On the left side, the authors separate three groups of components: technology and data, ICTs and other technologies, and data and information. This separation is in line with the study I show you when the authors separate the application of ICTs into use and capabilities. However, here we have a more detailed separation of technology application. In our right-hand side, we can see a separation into three environments: physical environment, society, and government. In the center are shown large areas where the technologies and their environments would be associated. I consider this figure quite interesting because it allows us to understand in a simple way the central elements that could involve a smart city project. Well, finish this part of the presentation. Let's now discuss the smart city classifications around the world. In this slide, I brought the smart cities classification according to the Singapore University of Technology. The Smart Cities Classification Index used by the university is organized in 5 areas: health and safety, mobility, opportunities, and governance. I find this index interesting because it assesses the HDI, the Human Development Index, to allocate a city as smart on a scale starting at AAA and going up to D. Um, it's of special importance to consider the HDI of a city before it's evaluated as smart, because as I said at the beginning of this presentation, a city does not exist without people. If the HDI is low, then the city cannot be smart. The intelligence or smartness of a city is improving the condition and quality of life of these citizens. Uh, so I ask you, what good is a city with many technological apparatuses, but with enormous social inequality? There's something wrong that needs to be reviewed in the smart city project like this. This ranking puts Singapore in first place, followed by Helsinki in Finland, Zurich in Switzerland, and in 10th place, New York City. Now, let's look in detail at the results of this index on the next slide. On this slide, we have the details of Singapore's ranking as the world's smartest city. I'd like to draw your attention to the top right-hand corner that I have highlighted in red. The letter font is a little small, but the priority areas according to the citizens of Singapore are highlighted there. We can see that according to the citizens of Singapore, the priority areas are affordable housing and on the second place, road congestions. This data, I think it's important for smart city projects uh, because the citizens judge which areas should be priorities. Now, let's take a look on the reality Brazilian cities according to this index. Here we have the largest city in Latin America, the city of São Paulo. According to the University of Singapore Index, the city of São Paulo was ranked in 100 position. And now let's take a look at the priority areas according to the cities of São Paulo. We can observe and highlight the areas security, health, service, and unemployment. We can observe a considerable difference in demands between cities. This, I think, suggests that smart city projects should take place according to the reality of each city. Let's take a look at the Brazil's second largest city, the city of Rio de Janeiro. The city of Rio de Janeiro is ranked in position 102 out of a possible 109. When we look at the priority areas in the city of Rio de Janeiro, we see that they are the same as in the city of São Paulo: security, health services, and unemployment. We realized that, according to the index of the University of Singapore, the largest Brazilian cities have very similar demands. So, in this sense, smart city projects could be focused on these three items initially. It's believed that making these three areas smarter could have more influence on the quality of life of citizens. And in this slide, I bring to you another index of smart cities. The index is from Business School of the University of Navarra in Pamplona, Spain. Maybe Professor Fernando knows it. This index evaluates 101 smart city indicators. These indicators are distributed in 9 areas: governance, economy, social cohesion, human capital, international projection, technology, urban planning, mobility, transportation, the environment. We can see that the most of the areas that make up the indicators we have observed in previous studies. We can see that the classification of the cities according to this index is different from the classification presented by the University of Singapore. In this index, the city of Singapore appears in ninth place. Well, the difference between the classifications of a city as smart, I believe, calls attention. But before we discuss why this happens, let's analyze the classification of the main Brazilian cities according to this index. Unlike the previous index that ranked 109 cities, this index ranks 174 cities around the world. I highlight the position of the best ranked Brazilian cities, the city of São Paulo in position 123, the city of Rio de Janeiro in position 132, and other Brazilian cities such as Brasília, position 135, Curitiba, position 138. Well, I think we can conclude that the Brazilian reality in relation to the concept of a smart city is quite incipient. Our main cities are quite distant from the first positions, regardless of the ranking index considering. So I highlight a wide space for opportunities to smart city projects in Brazil. We are at the beginning of a trend that will be mandatory to all cities in the world, in my opinion. Okay, returning to our discussion of why the smart city ranking indexes are so different, let's go to the next slide. In this study, the authors analyzed 431 indicators of a smart city and defined a taxonomy to analyze these indicators. As shown in Figure 1, in my opinion, the Figure 1 is fantastic because it allows to see how to this huge number of indicators can be allocated and a more homogeneous index could be built. Uh, Note that besides the key sectors of a city, such as natural environment, transport, energy, and etc., Figure 1 define types of indicators that can range from input to impact. Furthermore, the indicators can also be classified in terms of urban focus, like sustainability or smartness. Uh, I think this is fantastic because it allows you in a smart city project to have an exact notion of what you intend to evaluate and with what focus. Well, this huge number of indicators caught the attention of the world standardization bodies that define some standards associated with smart cities and smart and sustainable cities. So let's take a look at the next slide. Uh, Following the previous discussions, the world standardization bodies like ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, and ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, developed some indicators for smart cities. Based on the distribution of indicators, cities that focus predominantly on becoming a smart, sustainable city should consider following the ITU 40901 or ISO 37122 indicators. The, the ITU 4901 standard is best suited for a city that is an early stage of development or interested in the implementation stage of various smart technologies. The ISO 37122 has a slightly broader scope, also includes some environmental and social impact indicators. The ITU 4901 has a scope more associated with measuring the results of smart urban ICT solutions with a complete lack of impact indicators. Well, as we can see, the standards, as the scientific literature has shown, must be applied at different times in the development of a smart city. Now, I'd like to discuss the challenge that involve the theme smart city. Here I bring to you a graphic organization of the main challenges that can surround the development of a smart city. Initially, from the moment a city becomes more connected, it will automatically start to have challenges associated with information security. Here in this picture, it's called challenge of hackers. Especially in Brazil, we have a big problem with this because the vast majority of Brazilian municipalities do not have professionals specialized in information security. And in my opinion, outsourcing the security of public information, it's a big mistake. We also have challenges associated with urban design, economic challenges. Smart city projects always involve high values. Other challenges are associated with administrative management, infrastructure, and operationalization of technological researches, training, adoption of an interdisciplinary vision. So I consider this challenge one of the main challenge for smart city projects. And furthermore, we have challenges associated with the adaptation of people to new technologies. How to make the culture change required by the great use of technology. Well, uh, I think discussing the smart cities theme is not easy. We have great challenges, opportunities ahead of us, especially for us researchers. The opportunities are huge. However, we need to think together, join forces, and discuss the cities of the future from an interdisciplinary perspective. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. This is the reference that I used. Here my contact. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rodrigo. It was very nice also, your presentation. I wrote a lot of things here about your presentation, and I really like it that you show it a very human perspective for smart cities. When you said that a smart city is a smart city without technology, that was like mind blowing for me. It was very interesting. Thank you very much. We have two questions here for both of you, so you both can answer the questions, Professor Rodrigo and Fernando. So the first one, it will be for specifically for Professor Fernando. Would it be possible to consider and establish a standard not only using machine learning, but also Euler-based integrals?
Well, when define a standard, I mean, I think that the question related to the mobility models that we have talked about. In the problem, not only the human mobility in the human mobility domain, maybe in general in Mars cities domain, in the smart city domain, as Professor Rodrigo just also I think also know, is that there is a lack of standards, or not a lack of standards, there a lack of the actual application of the standards in the smart city deployments. Smart standards or attempts to define standards, different technologies to deploy smart cities have been defined at large scale, but the adoption is still low. In the human mobility domain, we have the same problem. The definition of standards to try to provide a uniform definition of the different concepts involving human mobility is a very hot topic, but there is a lot of work to be done. In terms of Euler-based integrals, maybe this is some kind of mathematical concept to model certain aspects of human mobility, but I think it's not deadly useful in or not. It's not. I mean, the standard is not going to be based only on a certain mathematical concept. There's a broad aspect. So I think that in that case, could be useful to model certain aspects of human mobility, but not. I think not to come up with a formal standard to develop or to model a certain aspect of human mobility.
Thank you, Professor Fernando, once again. And we also have another question for the same person, Professor Merson. What is the role of the stakeholders in the development of smart cities?
Well, I don't know if I think that stakeholders is a key role. I mean, at the end, they are going to. I mean, stakeholders play a two type of role. I mean, in that sense, that the stakeholders are going to be data providers, because at the end they run different services and they are going to provide and to release a lot of data that will enable the development of a lot of smart cities, because it is true that a city without technology, I mean, smart cities are not going to be developed without technology, not only with technology, but technology plays an important role, but also the data. I mean, there's the typical sense that data is the new goal or things like that. And I think the stakeholders play a key role because they release a lot of data, but also they play an important role in order to define the actual needs of a city, because they know they have a lot of they know what the city or the different services that the city will have to will need. So they play both roles: data providers, you know, to develop urban services, and also the role to define what the urban services and what are the services that need to be developed. So absolutely, they play a key role in the development of smart cities.
Yeah, I agree with you, Professor Fernando. Well, when we see in a context of smart cities, we can have a plenty of stakeholders, né? Especially municipality stakeholders. But in my opinion, the main stakeholder are the citizens. We need to think about projects of smart cities regarding what the citizens need. So they are the main stakeholders in a context of smart city. But it's not easy to think or to organize stakeholders and attend all of them. We have different necessities. We have different expectations from the different stakeholders, and I think when you see to the municipalities, to the major of a municipality, he is the main stakeholder when a smart city project started. But in my opinion, we have to see, or we must have an interdisciplinary view. We have to have in one group different researchers from different areas, from ICT engineers and architects and different areas, discussing what is better to that city, because the cities are different, they are not equal, and a project that works for a city cannot work for another one. I think that's it. It's difficult. It's difficult to talk about smart city. It's not easy.
That's a very good point, because one of the things that we discussed within the research group is, okay, one particular solution of application that we develop for a particular smart city, or not a smart city, a urban environment, could be easily exported to another city. What are the requirements that we need? Because at the end, some kind of all types of application is a type of investment, okay, and an effort. And in most of the smart city solutions or smart or urban services that we see now, they are completely focusing on a particular urban environment, a particular topology, and blah, 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 okay? And okay, that's great. But if we are able to take that service and with some minor modifications, be able to deploy that in another city it will be great, because at the end, from the point of view of operators and at the point of the industry, it will be a great step forward. But the thing is that at the end, in the research in domain, we see that solution that particularly targets to a very, very particular use case. And I think this is good in certain aspects, but not really fine in other terms.
Yeah, we have an example here. The city that I live, it's called Varginha. So we have a project that it's having at this moment, and so I have some information about this project. I'm not working on that, and the name of the project is Smart Cities. But when we see the project, it's about security cameras. They deploy security cameras along the city and the data center to storage the images. It's not a smart city project. It's only a little bit piece of a smart city.
This is very, very interesting, because we were talking about with a company a few weeks ago, and they talk about that they have a very similar problem in terms that they have a lot of towns in Spain where they have a smart city sensor deployment, and they have the full city covered with all type of sensors: smart cameras, temperature sensors, noise sensors, blah blah blah. And they have a dashboard where they visualize all the sensor data. Okay, a very dashboard. But at the end, municipalities need to, when that project is finished and all the sensors are deployed, they see that they can't do anything. They cannot do anything with that, because it is a dashboard, okay, with a lot of data, but they do not provide actually knowledge about this, the pace of the city, the dynamics of the city, and they need to hire another company, a second company, to develop a system able to just to analyze all the data that's been collected by the first company. So this is a typical product, as I said, that municipalities just think that they need to deploy a lot of sensors and then, well, we will see what we do with all that data. And I think that they need to think about in a top bottom way of thinking. So we want to collect this type of knowledge, and then based on what we want to know, then we need these sensors, but not the other way around. This is the problem. This is very funny that you say that, because
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They deploy a plenty of sensors and then
Exactly.
collected a huge amount of data. So
Exactly.
now, what do you do with that?
Exactly. That's the point.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, both professors. It was very interesting once again to have you speaking about this topic. And certainly it is very complex, the team smart cities. And hopefully we will have in the future more smart cities, especially in our country, Brazil. I guess we are done here. Once again, thank you so much for both professors, Professor Fernando, who is a guest here, Professor
Thank you.
Rodrigo is from UNIS. Thank you very much once again. And thank you very much for those of you who are watching. Bye, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.